Now, once again, Raymond Arroyo.
Welcome back to The World Over Live. He's written more than 70 books, many of them New York Times bestsellers. He is one of the foremost authors of suspense working today. His latest novel, Innocence, continues his emphasis on the supernatural and something more. It grew out of a short story he wrote in 2013 about a young man named Addison Goodhart, a misunderstood loner searching for hope. I sat down with him recently at his home in Southern California, and we talked about his writing process, how he stays inspired, and the ways his faith continues to shape and influence his work. Here's my exclusive interview with Dean Koontz. Dean, I have to tell you, I just finished Innocence, and it is such an unbelievable read, so I want to spend a little time talking about it. At the center of this piece is this character, Addison. He is an outsider. He is a loner. There are some qualities I thought that were similar to your Odd Thomas. Tell me, why are you drawn to these outsiders, these sort of figures in the shadows?
I never thought of that as being part of what I do, or that I often go to outsider characters on the fringes of society. And then some critic wrote it in a review, and I suddenly stopped and thought, that's correct. And I've thought about it since, which may be not a good idea, because let your subconscious do what it does. And I think it's probably because I grew up feeling like an outsider. I was in a very poor family. My father was a violent alcoholic who had 44 jobs in 34 years. And he wasn't the town drunk, but he was one of the town drunks. And so I always felt humiliated as a kid and was very shy because of that. So I always thought, I think probably all the way through college, I felt like an outsider to things. So it's probably why I'm drawn to heroes who aren't big, strong men of action, or instead fry cooks in a desert diner, or somebody like Addison, who is the ultimate outsider.
Literally living underground. And there's something about that I certainly arrested my attention. He experiences the world really through the written word, through books, rather than direct contact. Is there any connection between that character and Dean Koontz?
That's probably exactly correct, because when I was a child, the way to escape what I was living through, my mother was a great person, but it doesn't matter if there's one sort of sociopathic personality in the house. And so I escaped into books, and I went to the library. As early as 10, probably 8 or 9, I would go to the library and go through the children's book section. And I remember when I got to be 12, the librarian, I had read all the young adult fiction and everything. And so the librarian said, you know, you're not allowed to go into the adult section until you're 16, but in your case, I'm going to let you go in there at 12. And of course, this was in a much more innocent time, so there wasn't exactly anything horrifying in the adult section. But books showed me not just how to escape my circumstances. They showed me that there were other ways people lived. You know, when you're a kid, you kind of tend to think that the way things are in your house when the doors close is the way it is everywhere. And so books were the way I learned about the world. So in that sense, I have Addison. Same thing.
There's a little bit of you in Addison. No, he's such a beautifully drawn character. I mean, your heart goes out for him instantly. He obviously has some sort of defect. He hides his face. People don't want to look at him, and in fact, they're drawn to rage when they see him, and horrible things happen. So he sort of lives in the shadows. In some ways, there is a real lyrical tenderness here in this work, in between the lines almost. I found it extremely moving, and there are obvious things we cannot talk about. You want to leave some mysteries intact and let the readers enjoy the experience. What are you hearing about this, and why is this so different, do you think? You've even said that this is very different for you. Why?
It's there's times in your career when you make a leap that you don't know where it came from. It might have been the cumulative things you've been writing all these years and the lessons you learn as you go. But it really sometimes just feels like you've been given an inspiration, you've been given a gift. And this book felt like a grace given to me. When I started to write it, I knew I wanted it to be very lyrical. We have such a beautiful language, and there's so much you can do with it. And I knew that this story would be best told if it was very lyrical, if it read almost like poetry. And I didn't know if I could achieve that, but as soon as I heard Addison's voice, and since he tells the story, as soon as I heard his voice, it began almost to tell itself. I've never had anything write so smoothly with so little effort on my part as this. Now, not to say it was easy, it's never easy, but I was, in this one, the language, more than ever, is as important as the plot. And because it creates mood. And I don't know that I've ever created sustained mood as much as I have in this. And it's interesting because there are so many different characters in it, even though he's narrating it. There's quite a cross-section of city life in it. And nevertheless, as it kept going, I kept, beginning every day, I go back and think, I read what I've written and I think, I'm not going to be able to sustain this. And the moment you don't sustain it,
the dream breaks.
so yeah, you've lost the audience, and but happily it's sustained all the way through.
Where did you find that voice? That's always such a challenge when you're writing in first person in the voice of a character. Finding that voice can be awfully difficult. And this one just came to you?
It's what you want. What you definitely don't want is if you've done other first-person narratives, you don't want him sounding like Odd Thomas or like I wrote a book called Life Expectancy, and that is a very different voice. But in this case, I just almost started to hear Addison speaking to me, and he was such a charming character. This book isn't full of Odd Thomas kind of humor. It's a more sober
It is,
story.
I was actually, I thought, oh, well, I know there's going to be some real laughs along the way. And they're really, it's sort of a very suspenseful, heartfelt, really, it's people searching for love and experiencing loss and rebirth. I mean, it really is you deal with themes here in a way that I don't think you've ever dealt with them before. Do you have a sense of that?
I think so, but it's a very difficult thing to describe. Why, do I know I've dealt with themes here in a different way and perhaps a deeper way than before? Yes. Can I explain what I mean by that? Almost certainly no. It's just that as it began to unfold, and there is Addison, to give the viewer a little idea, Addison on the night he is born in a remote house high on a mountain. Only his mother and he and the midwife and her daughter. And the moment he's born, the daughter runs from the room in terror, and the midwife tries to smother him with the birthing blanket. And after that, he never sees anyone but his mother for the next 8 years. And at the end of the 8 years, his mother says, "I can't stand to look at you anymore," and turns him out. And there was something so sad but real about that. I mean, we're living in a time where people, as horrifying as it is, police find babies left in dumpsters. And so it ties to a real world feeling here. And there's something badly wrong with Addison, but you don't know what it is. And I don't know, I just identified with his voice so strongly. I guess we go back to identify with outsiders. And he is probably the ultimate outsider I've ever written about.
He really is. He really is. I want to give people a little sense of the lyricism we're talking about. There's one point in the book, and you write, and this is Addison just describing a snowfall. And in it, he really captures, and you capture, I think, one of the themes of this work. He says, through the stillness, snow fell not in skeins, but in infinitely layered arabesques, laying boas on the limbs of leafless trees, ermine collars on the tops of walls, a grace of softness in a hard world. Is that what this work represents for you?
Yes, in fact, it does. The title, Innocence, is, I had another title for a very short period of time, and I came to my senses. And it was, I knew from the beginning this book is about innocence, and it's a celebration of innocence. Addison is completely innocent, and I will say no more, but he's a very sweet character, and we're living in a time where we've lost our innocence as a society, as a culture. And I think it's one of the big things that's wrong. You know, when I was a child, I could get on a bicycle and just ride all over town. I could be gone all day. Nobody would ever think that anything could happen to me. Now parents are afraid to let their children play in the front yard.
Right.
And our culture has just lost its innocence. And I wonder how I would grow up if I was young now and growing up in this culture. And I wanted to write a book that celebrates characters who are innocent, who are not hipsters or, you know, they are cool, but they aren't cool by the definition of what's cool these days.
Yeah, well, Gwyneth, the girl character in here, the female lead, she's certainly a goth girl. She's sort of a hipster.
Gwyneth has both of them have problems. Addison, when people see him, his eyes, his face, even his hands, a glimpse of him, they are sometimes driven to want to kill him, and they infuriated and terrified at the same time. Gwyneth is, she has social phobia. She can't bear to be touched around people. And when he meets her and says, well, I can't allow you to look at me and you can't allow me to touch you, we're hostage to our eccentricities. We're made for each other. And so in her way, she dresses in all this goth, so it will turn people away from her. Yeah. And it's her disguise, in a way, and her way of putting distance between herself and people.
There's a line that leapt out at me, and it's late in the book. Addison says this: there are things you hope for but never expect to receive because there is no luck, and never was. But also because there are things of such great value that not all the good you could do in an entire lifetime would be enough to make you worthy of them. If one of your hopes is fulfilled, if that precious thing ever comes to you, it comes to you as a grace. And every day of your life thereafter, you need to give thanks for the gift. The girl I met in lamplight near Charles Dickens, she was my grace, all I wanted or would ever want. There is a sort of wrestling here with an innocent love, a yearning to be loved and to love. That's sort of at the center of this piece. Was that an intention when you started, or did that fall out in the writing?
I always knew there was going to be at the center of this, though it's suspenseful and everything else. It's, at its heart, it's about love. And it's about love between a man and a woman, but it's also about love of God and God loving us. And it's about all kinds of love, really, within the story. And I've been married to my wife 47 years, and I often think I saw her standing at a street corner. We had gone to the same high school, but there were so many students in it. It was the central high school for the entire county. And I had never seen her in the halls, and I was a senior and she was a junior. And I was in a car riding with a friend of mine. His family had an extra car, and we stopped, and she was standing at a street corner, about to cross to go to work. And I said to him, "Who is that?" And he said, "Oh, you don't want anything to do with her." And I said, "Why not?" She's just the shoemaker's daughter." And I thought, well, I'm just town drunk's son. At least her dad works.
This could be a step up.
Yeah. And so I was so taken with her that I found out who she was then, and she had always been the president of her class every year. And so I found out where her homeroom was, and I endeavored to cross her path several times. And I often think, if I hadn't been at that street corner at that moment, I had been in school with her for years and never seen her. I would probably have gotten through the rest of my senior year without ever seeing her, and we would never have been married. So there are moments are part of your destiny, I think, and which I think is a grace. That's a great grace, because I can't imagine ever having been married to anyone else. So that's sort of, I guess, where I got Addison and
You
Gwyneth.
feel that in the book. You feel it. It's deeply felt and rendered in you, and the reader certainly experiences it. There is also random evil throughout this book, and it moves with an alarming sort of randomness and terror. Is that part of your conception and understanding of evil in the world, that it doesn't pick one or two targets, but lashes out in many directions and comes unpredictably?
Evil is unpredictable. It's because it comes out of chaotic thinking. And we know who the father of chaos is. So, and in our world, we see random evil of the most outrageous kind all the time. It's, you know, I hardly ever watch the evening news anymore because there's too much on it I don't want to let into my head.
Tell me all about it. I got to cover this stuff.
So it's...
That's why I read your books, to escape from it.
Well, in a book, in fiction, which is why I'll always write and love to write, is you can manage the world.
Yep.
You can take the world that sometimes seems to make no sense, and you can say, which this book does in particular, it can say it makes perfect sense if you're willing to see the world as it truly is, in all its mystery and depth, and then things begin to make more sense to you. And people will say to me, not so far in this book, but I'm sure I will hear it, well, is this going to say there's good and evil? Because I don't really believe there is. I think there's levels of gray. Even in bad people, there's a little goodness, and even in good people, there's badness. Yes, but there is evil, and it's manifest, and you see it every day. And if you don't recognize it, if you're going to live your life thinking evil isn't real, you're defenseless because it is real.
Addison, this is a character that you also used in a short story that came out before the release of this book called Wilderness. Tell me about that and why you chose that as sort of the appetizer for Innocence.
Well, in this age of ebooks and all of this, a publisher wants you to help pre-sell the book by having a related short story or novella that gets sold first and intrigues readers, so they pre-order the coming novel. And I started a story that was to be called The City, and it had none of the characters from Innocence, but there was a link. And I started working on it, and I realized it wasn't going to be a novella, it was going to be a novel. And so I had to put that aside and write something else. And I decided to write a little story with Addison that takes place just sort of before the novel opens. And but I was running out of time because I spent weeks writing the longer piece. And so I said to my publisher, when do you have to have that? And they said Monday, and this was Wednesday afternoon.
Oh my gosh.
But it only has to be 8,000 to 10,000 words, and yeah, but
they're only.
so Thursday morning I get up to write this short story, Wilderness, and I'm having breakfast, and lower middle front tooth breaks off at the gum line.
Oh my gosh.
And I spent all Thursday in endodontist's office having root canal and having the tooth fixed.
Oh my gosh.
So I ended up only having Friday, Saturday, and Sunday to write the short story.
And I know you love to write 20,000 words in a day and a half. How many words? Do you do word count? Do you?
No, I go through each page over and over. I think I may have told you that before. Yeah. I write, it could be as little as 10, sometimes 20, sometimes 30 times through the page before I ever move on to the next page. And I'm more concerned about how many pages did I get out today? And 3 or 4 or 5 is good, but some days you hit more. And Innocence was the most wonderful writing experience I've ever had. It was, you know what a flow state is? What athletes call being in the zone? Yes,
explain it to people.
It's, psychiatrists say, or psychologists say, that it's for reasons we don't fully understand. We start performing at the thing we do, whether you're an athlete or a writer or a musician. You suddenly perform at a much higher level than you usually do, and with great ease. And you begin to doubt it because you think this is happening too easily, and that can make it all stop. And I've learned over the years it happens so seldom that when it's starting, you just don't treat it very superstitiously. Just let it happen.
Keep going.
And that's what happened with this book. And I've learned over the years that's always going to be some of your best stuff. It's only a few chapters in some books. This book was beginning to end. It was a great gift. And I felt all the way through it that it was a gift.
Where did you start with this story? What was the germ of it? Clearly, there's always a little anecdote, a vision, or something that throws you into the story. What was it here, and how did you maintain that flow?
This is very unusual because over the years when I've done book signings, at least 1,000 times, probably 5,000, somebody in the line, people in line say, I bet you get a lot of ideas out of dreams, don't you? And I've always said, no, not a one, zip, zero, nada. And then early last year, I suddenly sat up at bed at 4 in the morning, woke up, and I woke up from a dream in which I was having lunch with an actor and writer named Tom Tryon, who's been dead, I think, about 18 years or something like that. And he wrote the book The Other and a number of things. He played the lead in The Cardinal, if you remember the whole movie. Yeah. And we're having lunch. I never knew the man, so why he was in my dream, I don't know. But we're having lunch. We're celebrating the success of his newest book, and we're talking about scenes in it. We're having some red wine, and every time we start talking about a scene, there was a dream within a dream, and I would see the scene. And the dream within a dream was color, and I don't dream in color normally. Sure. And I didn't wake up with the whole story, but I woke up with the character of Addison, and I knew the situation. And I saw the snow scenes in the dream. And I woke up, and I was so excited about the story. I was working on a novel. I had to finish that before I could get to it. Mm-hmm. And then when it all went well, I said to a friend of mine, Wesley Smith, I was talking to him, I said, this thing really went well. And I said, the only thing I'm worried about is, when I die and pass over, what if Thomas Tryon's waiting with attorneys?
He's going to be there with a royalty statement.
And Wesley, who is an attorney, said, don't worry, there aren't any attorneys in heaven. And I said, wait, I didn't necessarily say heaven either. So,
oh, well. So how do you keep this going? You had these vivid scenes, you had this character. Do you do outlines? How do you proceed?
I never outline. I used to in my youth, and one day I just stopped, and everything got better when I didn't outline. Wow. And I say it's like God gave us free will to make our decisions and do right or wrong. And I just try to give the characters goodwill. When I try to explain this to some writers, I've met writers who understand exactly what I'm talking about. But then there's some that, well, you're writing it, so they don't have free will. I say, yes, they do. The strangest thing happens if the character comes alive. They go places I would never have anticipated it. And there's often, I'll stop and go, wait a minute. That's the wrong thing, and I'm writing it, and I've learned, no, you just have to trust the character. If the character wants to say that, wants to do that, it's going to take you somewhere interesting.
Now, I have read that you have had it with series. Odd Thomas, and when you reach the end of Chris Snow, that's going to be it. Is that true? Why? What's wrong with series?
It may be true. I may be lying.
Give us the scoop here, Dean.
I just delivered a novel that may turn out to be a trilogy.
Oh, okay. So you've started a whole new series, is what you really mean.
If I was less of an idiot, I would have learned years ago not to make such public statements, but I still do it.
You have long, in the course of your work, championed and pointed out the great value in the disabled, in those with disabilities. There is a girl at the center of this book who is in a coma-like state. And one gets the feeling from some of the characters that she should have been disposed of a long time ago. Is that, how calculated is that on your part, that I'm going to put someone in this book who has disabilities because I want to show the value of their life?
Well, I will say I didn't start knowing that character was going to be there, but there came a moment in the story where I knew there had to be something, these two characters together, there had to be someone they needed to save at the penultimate moment of the story. And because my wife and I have for a long time worked with charities for people with severe disabilities, I've met many of them, hundreds, and they're inspiring people because they don't complain about their lives. They just want to live as fully as they can. And so I have become aware of the utilitarian bioethics, the Peter Singers of the world who believe that disabled people might not necessarily get antibiotics because they don't contribute to the happiness of the world. And that's one of the arguments they make. They add to the misery of the world. So it's a moral decision to let them die so that the world will be a happier place. I think that's somebody who has something seriously wrong with them to think that way, because what I've gotten out of people I've met, children who, the most heartbreaking are children with severe disabilities, but they're exuberant, the ones I've met, and I've met many of them. We've known little girls in wheelchairs who handle them like skateboards, and they're just aggressive and just full of life. And those people don't think their quality of life isn't worth living. They think their quality of life, they'd like to have the higher quality of life, but they're happy. And I wanted to have a character in this that not only is it a good thing that they did take care of her in this story, because eventually, don't want to give away a plot turn, but she turns out to be of great value. And so at some point I knew I was going to have somebody to save, and that's when it came to me, what is this book about? You know, you have all kind of themes when you're working on a book.
Sure.
But at that time I had to reconcile myself to what is the main theme of this book, and it's about love in all its forms.
When you're writing in real time like this, Dean, and I'm asking as someone who obviously doesn't, I'm still using my outline crutch. When you're writing in real time like this, how do you develop those themes? Do you fix them when you rewrite, or are you very conscious of these themes emerging as you write and you start leaning into them?
That's more the way it goes. Because of the way I write all these drafts of a page before I move on, the only time I go back is at the end of a chapter. Then I'll print it out and I'll read it in printed form rather than a computer screen. And it's maybe had 20 drafts at that point, page by page. Now I pencil it, and that's it. After that, I never go back for another draft. Wow. And I say I build a novel like coral reefs are built by all these little dead calcareous skeletons that pile up on one another. And so when you work that way, you're moving kind of slowly, and you're surprised sometimes by the theme as it starts to arise.
They bubble up.
And you realize that's a thread to keep in mind, and so you have to hold it all in your head. But it works for me anyway.
Oh, I'll say, no, I am in awe. You have said that this book represents an evolution for you. And we talked a little earlier about what you think that evolution is. How do you think it will change your forthcoming work and the way you approach it?
I've already written a book since writing this one, and the change continued. It's the lyricism of the writing changed, but it's a different first-person narrative. I mean, the lyricism has stayed the same, but it's in a different voice this time. And I won't say what it's about exactly. It's a novel called Secret Forest, but one of its central themes is our relationship with nature. What is a moral and intelligent relationship with nature, and what is a skewed and disordered relationship with nature. And you would immediately think, oh, well, environmentalists are always right. No, that's not necessarily the case. It became fascinating to me. It's complex in the way that this is on different themes, but it's about a woman who starts developing a different relationship with nature. I'll only say that much more about her. And but it takes us into a place where it separates nature from God. God created nature, but we shouldn't worship nature. Nature is a great gift. The whole world is a great gift. Even Addison says that in his book. But there are right ways and wrong ways to think about nature, and some of them can be just deadly to your spiritual and your physical health. And this book plays with a lot of that. So I think this is permanently. And then I'm working on a book that's from the point of view of a 57-year-old black piano player who's telling you about something that happened to him when he was 10 to 14. And it's different from these books, but because it's being told like oral history, and I've never done a book like that either. So all of a sudden, at my age, you're supposed to be going, oh, I might retire, and
You're just getting started.
I'm very exhilarated every day I go into the office. So.
A number of people I've spoken to, librarians who've read the book, who really read, some rabid Dean Koontz fans, and my own perception is that the corner you have turned here, there's almost a Flannery O'Connor feel when you read this book, because it is probing into the heart of what afflicts so much of the culture and so many of us. And there is at once a great story being told, but there's almost the philosopher whispering in your ear as you move through it. Are you aware of that?
To the extent that I've long had, there's some people who don't like that. I never get on a soapbox in a novel.
No, you don't.
But
Nor do you here.
No. no. But I like characters who think about things. I like Odd Thomas is thinking about things at all times, and he tells you what he thinks of all kinds of things in the world. And in Innocence, I knew that this character has had a lot of time to think about things. He's lived in secret under the city, in storm drains and subway tunnels and all of that, and he can't show himself in public. And now at 26, you know, he's coming out because he sort of meets this girl in the library late at night. And he's had a lot of time to think about life and to read about it. And even though he hasn't interacted with people a lot, there's a great wisdom in him. And later in the book, we'll understand why there is a great wisdom in it, but it comes as a surprise. And he's, so I'm aware of that. And I want to know what I think about the world. And a character isn't always the author, but because you have to be true to the character. But it helps me to write a character who is observant and who has a little bit of a philosopher in himself, because it helps me to think things through in my own life. And this book, I'm not saying it's like therapy, but it's like a confessional in a way.
It's
it
like
really is.
Yeah, in some ways it's like a retreat as a dream.
Oh,
it has
I like that
feel to it. And you said earlier, you don't get on a soapbox. You don't. You're riding along with these characters. You're immersed in their story. There are moments that are absolutely terrifying. The evil is palpable around these characters, so the world is sort of coming in on them. And yet, when you blow by these scenes, on the other side of them, you go, wait a minute. And you sort of look back and go, wow. You know, it makes you rethink, or you see situations or events in the culture or in your own life in an entirely different way. It is a Catholic sensibility that seems to me is becoming more pronounced beneath the work, not on the surface of it. Are you conscious of that?
Yeah, I would say that there's a character of a homeless man in it. It's not a main character, but he's a strong secondary character. And he has a surprising role to play, but there's a character in the book who basically has saved him in a way. And there is within this book the whole very Catholic idea that we're all in Christ together, the mystical body of Christ, and that these characters, that is true. They're all on a journey together, and so they have responsibilities to one another. And the bad guys, of course, don't see they have any responsibility, but our leads do, and that really consciously was something I was working on in this book.
Well, you've accomplished it. It is a beautiful book, Innocence, and I look forward to the next one.
Well, I hope I'm around to have quite a few more.
Oh, I think you'll be around for quite a few. The way you write, with the speed at which you write, it's amazing to me. I want to end with this. Last time I was here, I was so in awe of your routine. Every day, you walk down this hall, you go into your office, and you basically sequester yourself away there for the day. This is your life here. Do you ever feel like a hermit? Like you're away from, I mean, in some ways you're like the monks down here at the bottom of the hill. You know, your life is sort of spent, focused, poured out on this work, and you really don't spend much time out of these walls.
I used to spend more time out, but one of the Norbertine monks that we're friends with has told me this house is kind of like a monastery, and I kind of lead a monastic life. But it's partly because when you're creating, it's much, much better to spend long hours at it, because the fictional world begins to be more real to you. And writers who say, I only work 3 hours a day, I can't even imagine that, because it would be too disconnected to me. And I was able, with our other golden, first golden retriever we had, I could write with her in my room with me, because she was not too needy. But the new golden retriever, I can't write with her in the room. She wants her head in my lap all the time. And so there I am alone in the room. Gerda's office is right next door, and we're free to come in and out of each other's office. But there's something beautiful about solitude too. I mean, I love human beings. I love people. But solitude there's a lot to be said for it, because it's time to think. It's time to put away all the busyness of the world. and focus on what you think is more important. And if you're writing fiction, you should believe that even if you're writing fiction that's meant to find a large audience, you should still believe that you're writing about things that are important or important to you, or otherwise, what's the point of doing it? So it allows you to have a lot of solitude to think about things in your own life, and they end up sort of flowing right out onto the page.
Yeah.
And I can't imagine doing it any other way.
You can follow all things Koontzian by following his website at deankoontz.com.